Hello and good morning, particularly to everyone watching on replay, since you'll be catching the very beginning of this show. My name is Neil Parekh, and I'm the executive producer for Sree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along, hashtag NYT Read-Along, and we've got a great show planned for today, as always. Our guests are Anya Schiffrin, author and professor at Columbia University, Holly Lofton Md from NYU Langone Health. She'll be joining us for our medical segment around 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And of course, our host is Sree Srinivasan. Sree's been hosting the New York Times Read-Along for about 5 years now. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Where are you watching from? And make sure to share this broadcast and tag your friends so they can join us. And now, as I mentioned, Sree is our host. He's in New York City. Let's take a look at what New York looks like this morning. Sree, what are we looking at?
Everybody. Yeah, good morning. We're on the Upper West Side looking downtown. Over there, you see the skyscrapers of 57th Street. And way in the distance is the successor to the World Trade Center. And the Empire State Building is kind of hidden among some of the closer buildings here. If I look to the right, you're seeing the Hudson River and New Jersey. And over on the left side, if we kept going this way, you would see Central Park. If I look down, you can see that on a Sunday morning, there isn't always a lot of traffic, but there are very few people walking around, even by regular standards, for 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday. And that's because of New York's situation with the coronavirus. And we also have a curfew that ends at 5 a.m. every morning. I believe tonight is supposed to be the last night, 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. And you're looking at the 96th Street subway stop, and no one's coming in or out of it right there.
That's just a sign of these times. It's just incredible. One thing to note, so you're on... I think it's 98th Street, right? On the Upper West Side. 96th Street is just below you. Somewhere in there is our guest, Anya Schiffrin. I think she was going to wave an orange towel from her window.
Yeah, it's her apartment's on the other side. As you might remember, Neil, I've been kicked out of my own apartment by my family because of too many live shows and making too much noise. And so we're in a different apartment. Our colleague and friend Rajni, her family are in Long Island now. They moved out to Long Island. So we're using her apartment, and we're on the other side of the building from where we usually are. We can see Anya's building, but not today.
Of course. So we have a number of people who are joining us today. You want to just take a quick hello to see who's with us?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
We have Helm Apollo saying good morning. Helm, curious of where you're watching from.
Las Vegas. He's watching
Vegas.
from Vegas. Yeah.
Great. Laura is joining us from Philadelphia. Jonathan, and I didn't catch that, day 5 of a power outage. Laura, hang in there. We lost power for about 3 hours. A few days ago, and that definitely had me worried. Jonathan Borstein from Union Square. Manuel Llaneras is joining us, I believe, is it Portugal, Sree?
Spain.
It's Spain. My apologies, Manuel. Doug Levy is up early, joining us from San Francisco, outside San Francisco. Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey. My mom, hi Mom, joining us from Hastings-on-Hudson. Thanks for joining us. Rachel Cooper is giving us some news. I think the New York curfew is canceled. That's interesting. I don't know if you'd heard that yet, Sree.
No, I had not.
So that's the one way to start the day with some good news. Helm is saying that we're awesome. Thank you. And of course, we're also on LinkedIn Live. Steve Taylor is joining us as one of our producers. Carla Baranakis, another producer, joining us from New Jersey. Thank you, Carla. And And let's see who else. And Rajiv Khanna is also here on the other side of the new White House wall, apparently. So things are interesting in DC, of course. We have Julie Branson joining us from the Upper East Side, but now in Dallas, former Upper East Sider. Colleen Schuster joining us from Tallahassee. Paula Kiger got her hooked on the read-alongs. Colleen, so glad that you can join us. And Paula, thank you for all the work that you do to make this show a success. Paula is joining us from Tallahassee as well.
All right, folks, let's keep telling us where you're watching from. We've been doing this for 5 years because we want to talk about print and news and catch up and talk. We've now built a wonderful community of thousands of people who watch every week from around the world. Please tag your friends. Please hit share right now so that they can join us. We would love to have them join us either today, otherwise every Sunday, 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern. We do the read along. I also have other shows that I do every week, every single day. We do the COVID show where we talk about different aspects of COVID. Now we've pivoted and talking exclusively about 3 aspects or 3 pandemics or 3 crises: the crises in healthcare in this country, the crisis around financial situation, as you know, with the economy, and we're also talking about the fight for racial justice in this country. So we are going to have a fabulous and important show tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. So please join us for that. And every day we'll have
every day. Sree does the show every day on the COVID-19 call. We put the information about Sree. The hashtag is Sree COVID-19 call. You can find all his shows on youtube.com/SreeNet. And of course, you can follow Sree on Twitter at Sree and at SreeNet on IG.
Thank you, Neil. And we also have a spin-off radio show on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and worldwide on WBAI.org. And we're always looking for guests for the read-along, the COVID-19 show, the WBAI radio show. So if you have any suggestions, always feel free to email me, sree@sree.net, SREE@SREE.net. And also, please tell us if you have any feedback to any of our shows as well. So we look forward to hearing from you. Pradnya, who's a former guest and a good friend of the show, is here, Silver Spring, Maryland, outside of DC. Ashok is watching from Kerala in India, where my parents live. So people are just tuning in. Colleen's is tagging a friend of hers, Bonnie. You can do this, right? You can hit share on Facebook, or you can tag a specific friend on Twitter. Also, you can hit retweet. We're on LinkedIn. Mark is watching from Durham, North Carolina. He was on a show we did called How to Be an Ally, and we had him on the show to talk about what we as non-African Americans can do to help and participate and be an ally. And we were also joined by Rahul Dubey, who was who now become famous because he was in DC during the protests, and he sheltered 70 people in his house in DC while they were being hunted by the police. That's the word he used. He saw in their eyes that they were hunting for these protesters and trying to lure them out of his house, and 70 people spent the night in his house. It's a fascinating story. Again, please subscribe to my YouTube account, youtube.com/SreeNet, and you can see the entire set of archives there, including the read-alongs, as well as every episode now on day 88 of the COVID lockdown in New York, and 88 shows that we have done.
Absolutely, Sree. And so one thing I'd like to do before we get going is actually recognize and bring on our production team. We certainly wouldn't be able to do this show without them. And they really bring so much in terms of adding context and links into the various platforms. So I'm going to bring on Paula Kiger and Steve Taylor and Carla Baranakis. Thank you, team, for joining us. We have, as I said, we have a great team, and this is really what makes the show possible. Paula is working in Facebook, adding links and context, answering questions, etc. Steve is in LinkedIn, And Julia Weeks is our medical segments producer. She's actually on the road this morning, so she's not joining us in person. But Carla Baranakis is also on our production team. Carla has done a great job with identifying and recruiting guests, helping to promote the show, connecting with our audience. So Carla, thank you so much for all the great work you're doing as well. If you want to reach out to any of them, you can find me at Neil Parekh. Paula is at Big Green Pen. Steve is at Steve DeReeve. And Julia, again, who's not pictured, at Julia L. Weeks. Carla is at Cabara, Cabara. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to our production team. We couldn't do this without you.
I want to just say to everybody, this is the ACE team that makes it possible for us to do our work that we're doing, not just on this show, but we are now doing virtual events, dozens a month for different organizations, big and small. So if you have a conference you're planning to cancel, don't cancel without calling us. We organized T4.education, the world's largest conference of teachers, 100,000 teachers. We did the conference in English, Arabic, and in Spanish, and that was last Saturday. And you can go in and see the entire conversation and how we did that all at T4.education. Everybody should see that. But we can be 10% of your production team or 110% of your production team. We can also create your own show like this if you would want that. So we tell people that people are tired of just being in Zoom calls. We do a television production, as you can see here. We're bringing in comments. We have the tickers, and we're able to do different kinds of videos that you may not see typically. So please let us know, Sree at Sree.net. We are doing so many of these, and we're learning every day. And I want to thank the team for doing this. I just want to point out that Carla, since we're talking about the New York Times, is former national copy chief of the New York Times, and is with us and has been such a great supporter and friend. And Carla, I'll be talking about the New York Times controversy with the op-ed in just a couple of minutes. I wanted to give you the chance to just say hello, and if you have anything you'd like to add to that. I know I'm putting you on the spot. We didn't get to talk about it earlier, but if there's anything you'd like to add now or share with us in the comments later.
The one thing I would add here is that Trish Hall, who's not the current op-ed editor, but the former op-ed editor, has a wonderful book, the title of which is escaping me right now, but she explains in great detail how things happen in the op-ed department, and also talks about the many sleepless nights she had wondering if an op-ed they were about to publish was going to have some kind of big repercussions. So I highly recommend that book. It came out, I think, about a year ago or so, maybe 2 years ago. And it's really a good book. I believe the title is something along the lines of Writing to Persuade, but I'll check on that and put it in the comments.
Thank you, Carla. And we'd love to have Trish come on the show and discuss opinions and the opinion pages of the New York Times. I know there'll be lots of interest, and we can talk about her book as well. So thank you, Carla.
So once again, thank you to our production team of Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, and Carla Baranakis. They're answering questions and leaving comments, adding links to articles in Facebook and LinkedIn. And as Carla is going to do some real-time research to find that book link that she and Sree just spoke about. So thank you again, and we will get on with the rest of the show.
Thanks, everybody. See you in a bit. We even do a debriefing after this, so we go well into well past 10:30 to do this. So let's thank our sponsors and let's get going.
Absolutely. So first off, we want to thank Muck Rack for the great work that they're doing. Sree, will you take this away?
Sure. We are delighted to offer with our sponsors, Muck Rack Academy, a free certification course called Fundamentals of Social Media. It's aimed at everyone, even though it says journalists and public relations. Everyone can participate, no matter what age, no matter what background or experience level. It's a free certification course that starts in 2 weeks. Please go to mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social right now, and you can get a reserved spot for that. More than 3,500 people around the world have signed up for the course already. mrac.co/social. Please spread the word, and please tell your family and friends and colleagues. They will benefit greatly. And the reason we're doing this, Neil, is because I was very keen to help people upskill their social media. And this is the one small thing that we can do to help people be better at social at this time. And you get a certificate at the end of it. You have about 2.5 hours worth of content. It's on demand. You can binge watch and take the quizzes right away, or you can spread that out over several days and weeks if you wish. But the course starts in 2 weeks, and you can sign up today at mrac.co/social.
Absolutely. We'd also like to thank Magic Bus USA for their sponsorship of the New York Times Read Along. Magic Bus imagines a world where children break out of poverty and lead fulfilling, rewarding lives, contributing to their community and to the world around them. As you can see, 7 out of 10 adolescents do not have a higher secondary qualification. In India, 6 out of 10 youth do not have the soft skills necessary for employment, and 3 out of 10 girls are married before they reach the age of 18. So Magic Bus is doing some great work, and we'd like to thank them for their support. In addition to Muckrack and Magic Bus, we also have support from Strategy Focus Group. Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. We'd like to thank all 3 of our sponsors, RAC, Magic Bus USA, and Strategy Focus Group, and in particular, Greg Gallant, Mike Schneider, Pradnya Haldapur, and Ron Thomas for all of your support for the New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in sponsoring, being a sponsor of the New York Times Read Along, please contact Sree, Sree at Sree.net, and myself, Neil at neilparekh.org, and we'd be more than happy to discuss the opportunities we have. Sree, we want to jump into the paper, and actually, before we even talk about this week's this Sunday's edition, there was a very controversial op-ed that was published earlier in this week. I'm going to pull that up on the screen for folks in case you missed it. This was an op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton with a very incendiary headline, "Send in the troops." Of course, the headline was written by others. But this generated a huge backlash, both from the public and from Times staffers as well. Can you speak to that a little bit, Sree?
Sure. This is where that op-ed would have run in the Sunday paper. It ran online earlier in the week, but was supposed to run in the print edition today. But the New York Times has now said they will not print it, as you can see, and that they would add an editor's note. And so if we look on the online edition, there's probably an editor's note of some kind already attached. I'd also look here in the the front section to see if there's an editor's note attached here yet. I don't see it here. It may be elsewhere, but it's online, as you can see there. So, well, read a little bit of that, Neil. I can't see it from
absolutely. So the editor's note was added after publication, I believe, and it's actually a fairly long note.
So just read the first couple of bits. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. After publication, this essay met strong criticism from many readers and many Times colleagues, prompting editors to review the piece and the editing process. Based on that review, we have concluded that the essay fell short of our standards and should not have been published. The basic arguments advanced by Senator Cotton, however objectionable people may find them, represent a newsworthy part of the current debate. But given the life and death importance of the topic, the senator's influential position, and the gravity of the steps he advocates, the essay should have undergone the highest level of scrutiny. Instead, the editing process was rushed and flawed, and senior editors were not sufficiently involved. While Senator Cotton and his staff cooperated fully in our editing process, The op-ed should have been subject to further substantial revisions, as is frequently the case with such essays, or rejected.
Thank you, Neil. One of the things that I will say to everyone who's wondering about this, one of the arguments is, oh, what about the First Amendment rights and things like that of the senator? This is not a First Amendment issue because this is a private enterprise, and the New York Times rejects hundreds of people every day, thousands of people every day. So there's no such thing as you submit something to the New York Times, they have to print it. And in fact, the reporting on this is still unfolding, that the New York Times is the one that reached out to Senator Cotton and to get him to write something about this. I am a big believer in reading views that you don't agree with. In fact, in our home, my wife and kids are very resentful of the fact that I force them to watch a little bit of Fox on a regular basis. And they find it very irritating that I do that, because I think it's important that we listen to views we don't agree with. It is important for us, for me as a journalist, but also for others who just to understand what is happening in the world, especially if we know how badly we got the 2016 election results, and many people missed what was happening with the Trump phenomenon. So that's not the reason why there's a controversy over this. The controversy is that to give such a powerful person, a senator, a sitting U.S. senator, this platform, and what he cited as the reasons for sending in the troops were the reasons themselves. Many of them were debunked in the paper itself. So he premised the call for troops on multiple lies and used that as a justification for attacking Americans. And it was the leadership of several Black newspaper journalists at the New York Times who pointed out that this puts them in danger. And if they hadn't called this out, I know we would not be in the situation we're in here today where we're talking about this. So I think that the Times has a lot to answer for. And if you believe, as the Times does, that people need to hear that view, there are other ways to do that. And as they themselves have now said, that it didn't meet their own standards. But the first reaction of the Times, the officialdom at the Times, was to defend and double down on this process and say, this is why we're doing it. And so that was the mistake that they made. Okay, so
Julie,
I'm sure
Julie
many
has
people have
a relevant comment, Sree. Shouldn't we be exposed to thoughts outside of our echo chamber? And I think you spoke to that, that yes, we should hear what lawmakers are thinking, but I think that the fact checking and the errors in the piece are the bigger issue, and kind of the larger context in which it's being shared.
Yes, you're right. And I can again tell you, the editors at the New York Times, we just mentioned that Carla Barnakis was copy chief of the news side of the paper, the national copy chief. They take a lot of care in fact checking. I've written more than 50 articles for the New York Times, and every one of them was fact checked, and it will go back and forth. I've written criticism, I've written news, opinion pieces, all of that, and it's always fact checked and edited with great detail. So there's no such thing as the Times has an obligation to publish whatever somebody sends in, and it's so important that we understand that, and also understand that the editorial section reports directly to the publisher and not to Dean Baquet, the main editor of the New York Times, who, as you know, happens to be African American and has shown great leadership throughout his tenure as the top editor at the New York Times. Let's look at some of the comments coming in. I actually wanted the U.S. military police to show up because the civilian police departments are moral failures, per the 400 videos of police brutality on Twitter from the protests. So that's a different argument that Apollo is making from Las Vegas, that we did need the police, we did need the military on the streets, but not to police the protesters, but to police the police themselves. So that's an interesting point of view. Amber says it's important that citizens understand the First Amendment and how it applies across industry, politics, and social life. Civic education is so important Also good for you, Sree, for diversifying your media diet. It's critical to hear all sides and compare how stories are shared across the media. And that's something that I've been advocating for a long time. We subscribe to the Wall Street Journal every day at home. And the first thing I do when I get the Wall Street Journal is to read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal and understand that again, it shows a different point of view that is important for me to understand. So I deeply believe in reading other points of view, and I want everyone to be able to do that. Carrie says, how do you balance difference of views versus inaccurate information in science and diversity? And those are some of the things that we're all wrestling with, and information and misinformation. And our guest today, Anya Schiffrin, will have a lot to say about misinformation and how people understand what that means and how to tell what's right and what's wrong, especially on the internet, as we are facing, as some people have also called it, an infodemic, where misinformation, disinformation is causing so many problems and adding to the pain that people are going through. So let's carry on with the rest of the paper, and we'll bring in Anya whenever she is ready. We'll bring her on. Our guests today are Anya Schiffrin, author and professor at Columbia University, Holly Lofton, a doctor from NYU Langone Health, and we are so grateful to both of them. Anya will be with us for about the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll be joined by Dr. Lofton. So let me say hi now to Anya Schiffrin.
Here. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Great to see you, Sree. So, from Shree's normal apartment, you cannot only see my apartment, but my mother's apartment. So you're bang in the middle of both of us. And
yes.
Your building was built. I did want to add on the Tom Cotton op-ed, which I'm so glad you raised. I think the main problem with it was that the first three paragraphs seemed to be completely untrue. And we all believe in this world that part of why we want a diversity of opinions is because we believe that diversity will sort of throw up the best opinions and the things that are true. And we need things that are true and helpful to help societies make decisions. So if it were true that the streets of Midtown were lawless, that there were tons and tons and tons of violence, then sure, could maybe make a case to bring in the military. But unfortunately, he made a whole lot of allegations that weren't true. And so therefore, nothing in his opinion piece had credibility. And like you say, I've never been asked to write an op-ed for the New York Times, but my husband does. And it was weeks and weeks to edit. So really, they just thought, this is timely, it's an important person, it's a senator, and they just rushed it through, and nobody actually his allegations. I mean, I think he was even talking about, rioters in beautiful cars. And apparently I read somewhere that's really a canard that Black people drive Mercedes, that's an old myth that's been going on for years. So sort of basic stuff like that would have to be fact checked. If it wasn't, I agree with you. That is something I would absolutely have retracted, regardless of whether I agreed with him for being a Republican or his opinion that troops should be there. There was just riddled with as far as I could see. Yeah.
You mentioned your husband, so we should just tell them, if people are thinking that last week's view of the studio that you're in looks very similar, why don't we tell them that your husband is Joe Stiglitz, who was with us and shared, this was the show from last week, where we had Sunny Slaughter, a business consultant, and Mona Abaza, a doctor from Colorado, and Joe, Nobel laureate, was with us and talking about his work on so many aspects of this crisis, including, of course, the economic side, but also his work on the Kerner Commission's successor project, and basically saying nothing had changed. And Joe did pretty well on the show, don't you think?
Oh, he really enjoyed being here, and he thought that your other speakers were just phenomenal. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. This has become our dining room in the apartment that we rent from Columbia at exorbitant expense, has become our studio. And so this is where we always do our thing. So yes, here we are, and Joe is here. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the pandemic time has treated you. How has your work changed? Of course, at Columbia, where you teach, They went in 2 days. They went online, and so teaching by Zoom. Talk about all of that, please.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about my experiences. Well, one thing is that Columbia, we feel really lucky because we only went online halfway into the semester. So we had built up this, and in my class especially, a real rapport with my students. And as soon as I heard we were going online, I took 36 hours. I totally upended my syllabus. So I won't bore everyone. I sort of flipped the class. I added in a whole lot of asynchronous material, as we call it. So basically I said, you can go watch a video, you can go watch a movie, and then we'll come together and we'll talk about it. And what I found in Zoom was that students who normally weren't participating, like maybe foreign students who were insecure about their English, were able to participate on Zoom. So that brought us all closer because we had more participation. The second thing was class got incredibly dramatic. I had a student get her test results in the middle of the class. People were getting sick. People were taking care of their family. All the students who didn't come from America, their parents told them early, you better come home. You better come home. We have health care. And then after Trump started tweeting against Chinese, the parents said, you better these people are racist and you could get hurt. So my Chinese students were waiting to get flights home. And then they would start coming to class from quarantine in little hotels around China. And there were no flights to Beijing because the government wanted to protect Beijing. So they were being flown to sort of what the Chinese call second or third tier cities, stuck into hotels there. And then they would show us phone calls all day long from their employer, from the police, making sure that they were there, they were quarantined, show us their QR codes that they were being assigned. So through my class, we got this complete window on how the world is dealing with COVID. And of course, then I started my newsletter. Shall I go on and talk about the decisions we're making at Columbia about whether to go back in the fall and what we're doing?
Yes, please. I think people are curious. You may break some news here because people are watching.
Sure, I will. So, as you can imagine, what I always say about COVID-19 and life is that everything is excruciating and there are no good decisions. So all day long, people are calling me up saying, is it safe to take the subway? Can I get a cleaning person to come in and change my 92-year-old mother's sheets? She has not changed her sheets in 8 weeks. She's not strong enough. Can I hire a babysitter so I can get my work done? Is it safe to ask my cleaner to come back? Is it putting her at risk? So all day long, we're all thinking these things, and we don't have enough accurate information because the science isn't settled. So the faculty meetings at Columbia are totally excruciating because we just don't know. And the students want to know. And the students are getting annoyed and they want partial refunds. I completely don't blame them. And everybody needs to make plans. So Columbia is taking a view that's really different from other universities. And who knows if it's the right thing to do, which is very much kind of do what you want to do. So the idea right now at SEPA is that we're not going to be able to do, Bollinger had talked about 3 terms. The idea at SEPA is we can't do that because of the way our program's structured. So we'll keep our normal calendar. We'll have some people teaching in the classroom with tons and tons of social distancing. So separating everybody, 6 people in a large room. And then we'll have all these cameras so that students who don't want to come to campus or they're in a different time zone can watch. And this already raises a whole pile of questions. For example, I teach a lot. I'm teaching a new course on misinformation and disinformation, and I teach a lot on sort of global media, which includes free expression. And I do not want my classes recorded because I think that would totally kill the discussion. And I want to protect my privacy and the privacy and safety of my students who come from many countries around the world. So for example, this is a good example of a real dilemma. So I think what I did last semester was I did a 9 a.m. Friday morning section just for students in China. So they wouldn't have to wake up at 2 a.m. to come to my class. And I may have to do something like that again so that I'm not taped. I do not want to be taped. Then there's questions about, how safe will people feel? Remember, so many university buildings on campus, Sree, you know our campus really well. It's all about funneling people into these lobbies and then, funneling them into these elevators. And even if we take the stairs are really narrow. So we're all thinking about safety, safety, safety more than anything. And I remind the students that sometimes when they say, harumph, we didn't get to go to graduation. I'm like, guess what? We're all trying to stay alive. I'll send you a case of champagne. We can do a big party. I'll host it. Right now, we're trying to stay alive. So it's really tough. There's absolutely no good decisions. It's hard for everybody. I'll put on my glasses so I can read some comments.
I can read that to you. Himali says that thank you, Professor Schiffrin, for pointing this out. MSM outlets are constantly defending their position. They are obligated to present both sides, but nobody wants to admit the GOP under Trump has totally lost their moral compass and no longer care about the truth. We also had a comment from Laura saying that it was fascinating to hear how things unfolded for your students. So many interlocking decisions and different experiences. And one of the things we've been saying, Anya, is that no one knows the answers. In the education side, in the medical side, the sainted Dr. Fauci doesn't have all the answers either. And all we can do as journalists is assemble the best information and try to interpret it in a fair and logical and scientific way. But that's not always enough, is it?
No, and what we're doing is really just trying to err on the side of caution. So, my husband's older than me, so I don't go into the supermarket. You never know, but you just want to be careful, which is why I always think it's interesting, all the people that won't wear masks. It's one of those things, thinking of the trade-offs, as my husband talks about, there's no downside risk and there's a lot of upside potential. So we don't know to what extent a mask is helping, but if it could help at all, then I'm happy to put it on, right? Because that's what we always want to do, the least amount of risk and the most potential.
And I think folks like you and me who've traveled the world and seen, it is not unusual in East Asia because of pollution and other reasons to wear a mask on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I think it's that Americans are so shocked to see people wearing masks, and the president has his own hang-ups about them. Let's talk about your newsletter, because before we talk about the newspaper, we're going to talk about your newsletter. Tell us about it.
Okay. So that's actually my dissertation conclusion, my newsletter, but I'm happy to talk about my newsletter. So my newsletter.
So hold on. Let's talk about the dissertation first. Go ahead.
I love talking about my newsletter. What would you, so shall I just tell you what my dissertation is?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm 57 years old. And I had a couple of regrets in my life. One of them was not learning French, and the other one was not having a PhD. So I began applying to PhD programs maybe 3-4 years ago. And I wound up, my mom's from Spain, and a lot of people I really respect, including my advisor, are all at the University of Navarra, which is up in the north of Spain near Pamplona. So I passed, I applied there and I was accepted. And yesterday, or was it the day before, I sent in like the complete final version of my dissertation. And the topic is policy solutions to online mis and disinformation, because I teach at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, where Claudia Dreyfus teaches too. And I really want to look at what can we actually do about this problem. And I take about 9 solutions that people are doing, or fixes as I call them. And I go through each one and I look at the pros and the cons of each one fix. And I further divide it into something that annoys people, but my loose sort of, academics love taxonomies. So what I'm basically doing is I'm dividing it into supply and transmission demand side. So the way this works would be, there's a whole lot, to me, something like fact checking or media literacy training or trying to build engagement with your audience. I would call those demand side solutions, because they're trying to educate people about quality news so as to produce a demand for quality news. And some companies, after the 2016 period, companies like Facebook, obviously didn't want to get regulated. So they put money into things like fact checking, because they said, great, we'll hire all these fact checkers, we'll fund all these fact checkers, they can do claim checks on what's on the platform. and some of the foundations did as well. Then you have solutions that affect more the supply or the transmission. So, for example, using content moderators or artificial intelligence, AI, that isn't about stopping people from supplying it as much as stopping it from being transmitted. Then you have the whole debate over Section 230, which is what Trump and Twitter has been fighting about all week, which I can explain in detail. And then you have a whole lot of other laws, like requiring disclosure of election advertising, so as to safeguard the integrity of our elections. And then laws against things like cyber harassment, so that journalists are harassed, sue using those laws. So I go through this kind of what I call the universe of solutions. I sort of divide them up. I explain each solution, how it came to be, what is the history. Is it, in some cases I look at, is it working, isn't it working? And then at the end, which you have, I make recommendations for what I think should be done. So that's it.
Awesome. So when you're turn it in, and you've turned it in already, and then the dissertation defense will be online, of course.
July 16th, yes, by Zoom. And then I'm writing a book proposal. I hope I can publish it. And, of course, I hope it won't get out of date, because things are moving quickly all the time here.
Unfortunately, I think unfortunately for you and unfortunately for the world, I think this topic is going to be with us for a long time. And understanding policy solutions is a great way of looking at this. And so when do we get to call you Dr. Schiffrin?
I think July 17th. My friends have been teasing that I should probably add it to my email signature with like flashing lights for a few months.
We will have to have a big party to celebrate when we're allowed to celebrate. So we'll do that. We do want to talk about your newsletter, but we also want to get to the paper. Just give us the ways that they can, what is in your newsletter and how can they get it?
Sure. So my newsletter started, my mom right now is in the south of England taking care of her sister who's dying of cancer. And I suddenly thought, my mom and all her friends are home and they're a little isolated, they're isolated. And I have so many friends around the world and former students who really care about New York City and want to know what's happening. So I started this newsletter. And it's a mixture of hyperlocal, what's happening on the Upper West Side, and news from around the world, which people send in on different subjects. So I also have weekly updates, what's happening with my mother, what's happening with the woman that comes to clean my house, which is a window onto New York City and the economy. I have a lot of reader mail about hair, so I talk about hair. I have 2 doctors that I call every week, and they update me on things like, is it safe to take the subway? And I talk about how long the lines of food, for food is in the different supermarkets. So part of it's hyperlocal, and everyone out of town loves to hear all the hyperlocal stuff. But then the other part is what's going on in the rest of the world. So for example, a former student of mine, a Chilean journalist, Francesca Skoknik, is now running a journalism school in Santiago. She wrote to me about immunity passports and how badly that whole thing that's my mom there, and that's me vacuuming on the roof after getting my hair done, about how badly immunity passports have gone. They tried to shut down different neighborhoods of Santiago, try to be very surgical, and instead the caseload has risen. I have a friend who's a sushi restaurant owner in Japan. So he sent in pictures of what do sushi restaurants, what are they starting to do with plexiglass? How will it be to eat sushi in the world? I had a former minister in Sweden write about what Sweden is doing, from Singapore, from South Africa. So really updates from around the world about how are people coping with COVID. And then, news from friends and students who are living in states that decided to open up. Here's a whole thing on Brooklyn as well. So it's gotten crazy long because people just write too much. It's absurd. It's about, 16 pages, but I'm getting so much fan mail, and people tell me they'll just read it throughout the week, or they'll skim. Barnard, for example, has a collection of zines. So last week we did a Q&A with the zine librarian about who's doing a corona COVID pandemic zine. What kind of zines are they? What are they like? 2 weeks ago, we interviewed a real estate broker who specializes on the Upper West Side because everybody wants to know if rent is going to go down. That's the zine interview. So I'm always trying to find stories. And then a big story for us was Jill Nelson getting arrested up in I think it's 160th Street for writing Trump equals plague in chalk on a piece of plywood at a construction site. And Jill is a fantastic journalist. She's now 67. She's a grandmother. And four police arrested her and held her for 5 hours and threatened to take her downtown because she didn't have ID. So she mentioned this to me, and I put this in the newsletter. And then West Side Rag, I got them to interview her. So we've been following that story really closely. And some of us have been, went up to a distance protest for Jill a couple of weeks ago up in Harlem. So we do some serious stuff as well as all the day-to-day things that people need to know about. I write update every week, what's happening at Columbia, our reopening, because our students and alumni really care. So sort of like what you do, Sree. I really love your newsletter. You're trying to bring people useful, thoughtful information about their lives right now. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you, Anya. Your newsletter is much more generous because you're publishing everyone's reaction and you've got a real community that you've built. And I think that's fabulous. Everyone can subscribe. There's the email address right on the screen. You write to acs726@columbia.edu and she will add you to the list. And you'll get so much information and so many useful tips. So everyone should do that. Anya, since you did mention your mother, I'd love for you to take a moment and just talk about your parents, because they are such interesting folks who had a big impact in the world.
Great. I just corrected my email address, by the way.
It's ACS776. I'm sorry about that. ACS76 is the email address. Thank you, Anya. We'll put that up again, so whoever has ACS 726 will be cursing us, but that's okay. ACS76@columbia.edu.
If people forget, they can always go to the Columbia website too, because that's where you can find all the faculty. You wanted to hear about my family, did you say, Sree?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So the thing about my family is that pretty much everybody was in exile. That's the way to understand my family. So my Russian relatives left Baku in 1917 and went to Paris. And then after the Nazis occupied, they left Paris in 1941 and they came to New York. And both my grandfather and my father were book publishers. And my mother's side of the family were sort of conventional, I don't know what, middle class, upper middle class, Spanish family. And they were actually a military family. So my great-grandfather was Chief de Rivera, and my grandfather was a military officer. So what happened was when Franco took over and did his fascist coup in Spain, my grandfather, who wasn't particularly political, said, well, I'm loyal to the flag. A bit like what's happening now. I'm loyal to the flag. I'm loyal to my country. And I'm not actually going to join this coup. So he ended up fighting on the side of the Republic. And I think he was key to planning one of the major battles that was sort of a disaster, the Battle of Teruel. And the Spanish capital had to move from Madrid over to Barcelona as the Republic was in retreat. And then eventually they got a ship to England. And it's a long, beautiful story. I won't go into all the details. But there was a sort of American millionaire called Dorothy Straight, actually married to Leonard Elmhurst, who had started a sort of progressive school in a utopian community in the south of England. Grandfather a job teaching geography, and so he died in exile in the south of England. So really, I guess 3 generations or 2 generations, my grandparents on both sides, my parents on both sides, were refugees from authoritarian regimes. And so I think I'm very, very sensitive. I think when Trump got elected and the language that we were hearing, very, very triggering. And I think more than for some of my friends whose families came from the US, had always been in the US, and didn't know the refugee experience in the way that our family did. The story, I grew up obviously in New York and very happy. and never wanted for anything, but all the stories of hunger and escape, and how do you know when to get out, and how do you get your papers. Somebody's published about my father's exile, and he and my dad, at that side of the family, were actually rescued by an American journalist called Barry and Fry. And there's been some wonderful books written about him. And I wrote a little piece for the New York Review Books website last year about my family's story. And really, I just drew on these fantastic biographies of Fry. And also in Marseille now, there's a Barry and Fry Appreciation Society. And we went and had a walking tour of all the places where he had been. There was a novel that came out last year about him, which was a kind of wacky novel that's being turned into a movie too. But yeah, so I would say that with Trump and what's going on, always in the back of my mind is, will I need to leave, basically. Yeah.
Let's read some of the comments. Your friend Terry Thompson and my friend Terry Thompson watching from Vegas very early in the morning, and she's tagging all the Knight-Bagehot Fellows to check out Anya on the read along. Stefan says, happy to teach you French versus you teaching me about misinformation. Stefan is our neighbor. He lives right between us. And he's from France, and so he can teach you French. And Savita says, thanks for being a great boss and your work on investigative journalism. Having to rethink how to teach my course this fall too. And it's ironically all about the rise of the risks of leaving people behind in the digital age.
Wow. Savita, I'm happy to work with you on that. And also at this faculty meeting I was just talking about, we're going to be doing workshops by specialization. So we'll do like a 90-minute one for team adjuncts to talk. Well, I guess you're an EPD, but anyway, we'll talk about that, and there will be some workshops to help all of us become better online.
And Terry says, July 17th, congrats, Dr. Schiffrin.
I love Terry. Thank you.
And Mark says, I missed a haircut appointment yesterday and needed it desperately. Fortunately, rescheduled for Monday.
Oh.
And Paula says, hair has definitely been an indicator of many things pandemic related.
Yeah.
And Apollo says, so glad you're doing this. Your resilience is remarkable. So that's great.
I know it's funny. Hair sounds superficial, but everybody cares about hair. I have a lot to say about hair. And the person who's rescheduled, I'm eager to hear what state he's in. And,
he's in North Carolina. So
down there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's look at the paper. And we have, let's see, I'm just doing a time check. We have about 25 minutes left, and we have the entire newspaper. So we need about 3-4 hours to go through this with you, Anya. And Susanna's watching from Mexico. I met you, Anya, in South Africa with the program on independent journalism. And Anya, you may remember that our friend Andrew Lee and I were in South Africa, and I sent you a photo of your book about African journalism in the bookstore right next to Trevor Noah's book, which was really cool to see that. And so just walking down the street in Cape Town, and there was your book. That was amazing.
Thank you so much. A lot of people worked really hard on that book. It was the first ever collection of journalism by Africans. Nobody had done that before. It was amazing. It took years. And now I think there's going to be different editions, like a Southern Africa edition, a West Africa edition, an East Africa edition. But the rule when we put the book together was only voices from Africa written by Africans. So we have 41 pieces of journalism with introductions as to how they, how they came about and how they mattered, why they mattered.
Patricia says, Anya is touching my heart. Thanks for sharing such personal stories that can expand people's minds. Okay, so we're going to look at the paper for a couple of minutes, and then Anya will come back to respond. Let's just look at the paper here. Fierce protectors of police impede efforts at reforms. Unions using their outsized political power resist checks on officers' behavior. Just so that everybody understands what's happening, you may have seen the videos of the 75-year-old man pushed in Buffalo onto the ground. He's bleeding out of his ears, and 2 of the police officers were eventually suspended, but immediately 57 officers from his unit resigned, not in anger over police brutality, but to defend him, and in anger that any kind of punishment had been meted out against those two police officers. So it tells you where the resistance is to police accountability in the police departments itself. And look at this. Why don't the police act as if they're accountable to Black Americans? And this is what I've been on a learning journey myself these last few weeks. And we're talking to so many people who talk about the pain that they're going through in the African American community. But this is a protest of not just African Americans, but every nationality, background is involved, and even globally, there are people upset. So this feels like a different moment than what we have seen. In the pandemic, as ever, I will give you rest. Rituals of the last rites change but endure. Taking a knee from sidelines to front lines. This was what Colin Kaepernick started, and the NFL said that they were wrong. They didn't mention Colin by name, but they did say they were wrong. In the GOP, some way a Biden vote. And just this morning on Jake Tapper's show, Colin Powell, the former U.S. Secretary of State under George W. Bush, said that he would vote for Biden. As heroes die, who will carry Europe's torch? And this is talking about the World War II generation and how Europe, as Anya knows better than me, has certainly become more radical with more right-wing parties coming into power, and Hitler infatuation, Mussolini infatuation, fascist motifs all over the continent. Very sad to see that. Spared viruses havoc, but not the economic pain, is an article here. And so it's just so much going on. Anya, do you want to weigh in on any of this? Please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Well, a few things. One is I teach a course with Minky Warden from Human Rights Watch at SEPA, and it's called Journalism and Social Change. And there's always that question of when does information make a difference and when does it not? And I think what I found, and this ties into my work on global muckraking, is it's so often the same problems that get, that are fought over and over and over again. And we know that the police are brutal and that the system is unfair. My husband was crying last week at dinner because it's like, all these battles. Do you remember the civil rights movement? Do you remember all of that? And the idea that 50 years later, we have to still have the same arguments is unbelievably depressing. What I found with all the investigative journalism, my books go back a couple hundred years. So we look at the same subjects and how they're covered over and over again, like labor disputes or trafficking of women. That was first written about, that I could find, in like 1870. So all consumer boycotts, like all this stuff has been going on for hundreds of years. But it turns out it has to keep people to be reminded of the problem. So so that's one thought, is that sort of the despair and the heartbreak that these are still having to be fought, and that this injustice has still not been dealt with, and this structural racism. So part of me feels so heartbroken. Part of me feels unbelievably inspired that our younger generation out and march peacefully day after day in this hot weather, that could be exposing themselves to COVID, is just remarkable. And for me, I feel ashamed, that I didn't understand. It's terrible sometimes, but I didn't understand. I had an adorable undergrad kid called Zach Hendrickson who took my class, 4 or 5 years ago. He then became the researcher on global muckraking, so I got to know him well, very well. Well, he just posted something on Medium this week, being beaten up and arrested by the police, and he's white, and watching all people just get kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked. And they were really doing nothing. They were actually just down on 12th Street marching, and the police were attacking them. And I think, this, beyond, it beggars belief. It is exactly what dictatorships do. But I think, again, that's why the Tom Cotton op-ed was unacceptable, because what we're seeing is violence from the police on innocent marchers. I was only, because I'm social distancing because my husband, I only went to the march here at 97th Street last week, and I only stayed a few blocks because I could see I couldn't distance. But the Jill Nelson one was distant, so it's okay. But the point is, what we're seeing, and I think the Times has been doing a very good job of reporting, is that the police are recalcitrant, they're digging heels, and that these marches are peaceful. So I know some people are complaining about the New York Times, as everybody always does, but I actually think that they've been fair in the way they've described the protesters and tried to bring it into economic inequality, such as that wonderful piece about rich neighborhoods around the country, like Buckhead, Atlanta, where Black people are serving $7 lattes. They're, receptionists at the gym. They're serving dinners in restaurants that they simply cannot afford to go to. Some of my thoughts about this coverage of the protests. I don't want to go on.
Thank you, Anya. Very important. By the way, we want to point out that I said that they had resigned. They hadn't resigned from the police force, those 57 officers in Buffalo. They resigned from their duties in their particular unit. So I think that means that there's an opportunity to get rid of all of them and hire new officers who will understand. And my wife, Rupa, who is watching upstairs in our apartment, she says that the podcast Throughline has a good explanation about the DNA of police units going all the way back to their origins as slave capture units. And that was the origin of the police system in the United States. And that's what's driving, that's what she has put there. Police slave capture and punishment units. And that's so sad to think about that. Spotlight on virus raising of Amazon only worsens. And so this is an example of Anya's work that she's been talking about, the importance of misinformation, disinformation. The country of Brazil, where the president is a Trump, I don't know if he's Trump light or Trump worse. He has been denying that there's a problem with the virus. And now Brazil is number 2 in the world with the virus. He fired the health minister because he spoke the truth about the virus. Meanwhile, the Amazon continues to burn. Look at this story. I missed it completely. During my COVID-19 show, we do a regular show called, an episode called News You Missed, because there's so much happening. It's very easy to miss the news. Look at this. A young woman was beheaded in an honor killing in Iran, and I didn't hear the story at all, and that's on me for missing that. Germany feels left out as Trump shifts alliance. Libyan commander says it's time to end civil war. French forces kill a top leader of Al Qaeda in Africa, and this is Trump trying to get a convention that he can be proud of. And here is some of the other things going on in America right now. And protesters fill the streets in Australia and UK flouting crowd limits. And you have been socially distancing, but I know others have not. Look at this. University in Florida to investigate professor who tweeted about Black privilege. This was an amazing story that I did catch. This author is of a book called White Shaming, Bullying Based on Prejudice, Virtue Signaling, and Ignorance. And he posted multiple things. For example, he said, Black privilege is real. Besides affirmative action, special scholarships, and other set-asides, being shielded from legitimate criticism is a privilege. But as a group, they are missing out on much-needed feedback. So I can tell you that Professor Charles Nagy is getting a lot of feedback right now for the University of Central Florida. And then he does something that is used to pit minority groups against each other, and he perpetuates the model minority myth of Asians. If African Americans as a group have the same privilege, same behavioral profile as Asian Americans on average, performing the best academically, having the highest income, committing the lowest crime, etc., would we still be proclaiming systemic racism exists? And just to be clear, that's the kind of thing that we see on WhatsApp from privileged Indians and other Asian Americans who love talking about things like that, while not acknowledging that in this city, for example, 25% of South Asians live below the poverty line and go hungry in New York City every day. So pitting minorities against each other, which of course is something that the majority do in so many countries around the world, is happening here as well. A lot of talk about Minnesota and Minneapolis, and there's Colin Kaepernick. Cyclist is charged with assaulting teenagers who posted flyers against police brutality. These videos, just when you think they couldn't get worse, they do again and again. And this is a beautiful picture of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in a 1965 civil rights protest. And Trump called people who kneeled sons of bitches on TV and went after them. Let's see here. Officers charged with shoving that 75-year-old. That was the story we mentioned. One of the things I like to do is to read the op-eds, and not the op-eds we talked about, the obituaries. And here are the obituaries in today's Times. Harry Hoffman, 92, who turned Walden books into the bestseller, is dead, calculating that an aging population would continue to shop at stores. Grace Edwards, 87, author of mysteries set in Harlem, publishing her first novel at 55 and the first of 6 detective stories at 64. Gives me great hope. Guy Bedos, a comic who made France laugh, called one of the caviar left. He said he'd rather be part of the couscous left instead of the caviar left. And so do you read the obits on a regular basis? Let's keep going here. The sports section has been reduced to just a couple of pages in the main section. And here's an op-ed by Larry Fitzgerald Jr. The city of Minneapolis taught me about love. He's a big star in American sports in the NFL. And it's very interesting that this is the kind of op-ed that the Times could be commissioning instead of, they could think of 1,000 other comments that could have been there. Let's go to the magazine section and William Barr's Long Crusade, it says. And this man, who was Attorney General under H.W. Bush Sr., came back in and became the Attorney General under Trump after he fired his hand-chosen Attorney General, Senator Sessions, who he loved so much and then hated so much. And he has enabled, many of us thought that this man would be a reasonable addition to the administration and a voice of reason and things like that. But for more than a generation, Attorney General William Barr has been fighting to unshackle the White House from outside oversight. And no president has benefited more than Donald Trump. And it says that Trump gives Barr a canvas upon which to paint his conception of a moral top-down society, and just really painful to see what he's been doing and how he has jumped in and enabled. And by the way, he also was involved, as we learned during the Rodney King efforts and the protests, the things that he did back then and what he's doing now, and just completely unacceptable. Here's the poem that's in the New York Times. We won't have time to read it, but we encourage everybody to read poetry, One Day Love Song for the Newly Divorced. One of the jokes, Anya, that people have been asking is that, are there going to be more babies, but also are there going to be more divorces out of this lockdown?
I think...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say in China, I think they've seen both. Sherry Prasso, I think, did a piece on this for Bloomberg, in fact. More divorces and more babies in China after the close down.
We won't have time to read the ethicist, but here's the question being asked. Can I tell my uncle that his estranged gay daughter is in bad shape? We won't have time to look at it, but those questions are often interesting and difficult, and that's why you write to the ethicist, right?
Yeah, the ethicist is great. Can I jump in and talk a little bit about some of the interesting things you said?
Please.
Yeah, so a few things. One is this nasty white professor, raises so many points. First of all, I don't understand why people need to be nasty. The police, this professor, I just don't get it. And especially during a pandemic, I think we all have to be a lot nicer. A friend of mine was telling me this week, he's writing some article that's going to be really like criticizing some of the journalists out there, this, that. And I just thought, we're a global pandemic. Like, my main priority, and I hope everybody else's, is what can we do to help in this terrible situation? Which of our neighbors can we help? Which of our students needs help? Is it shelter? Is it food? Can we donate to the lawyers that are helping the protesters? So I'd like just everybody to kind of orientate themselves to helping and being constructive and productive at this horrible time. So I don't get these people, and I don't understand what happened to the police force. I think I will once I hear the podcast from Rupa that was always this way. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think Trump's actions on Section 30 are all the right things for all the wrong reasons. I think that Jack Dorsey's did, it would be, first of all, it would be nice for everybody to just be nice and helpful and constructive. But given that there's all these elements out there that are just going around sowing division and polarization, using social media as a place to attack and not to build, then I think that what Jack Dorsey did is absolutely right. And I'm sure this is in the paper somewhere because it's been in the paper all week. But saying that he's going to, label Trump's tweets when they violate community guidelines is, the absolute minimum and should have been done before. So I also wanted to comment on was the articles about Germany. One of the things I've been trying to do in my newsletter is highlight examples from success stories. For example, we had something on Vietnam very early on because I used to live there. And I'm finding the coverage in the New York Times about Germany to be absolutely fascinating. So did you see that today they have that article about how they're, wherever you go now in Berlin, I think it was Berlin, you have your phone number so they can trace you if they do. And since the Germans, of course, passed the GDPR, the European privacy legislation, and they're very committed to privacy due to their history, it's on a piece of paper. It's not on a log. So if you go to a swimming pool, you go to a restaurant, you go to the library or anywhere, you write down your name and your phone number in case they need to call you. So I thought that article was really fascinating. And they talked about how, Germany feels back to normal now because of the tracing. So that's what I think the Times wasn't doing a few weeks ago, but now we're getting a lot more examples of good examples. On Brazil, and what you said about the health minister, that I had 2 Brazilian visiting fellows in my class this spring, and one of them is the journalist who that got the health minister fired. So he came to class one day on Zoom and said, wow, I've had a busy week. And we hear through the windows all the protests in the people supporting the health minister. And my understanding is that the health minister is a pretty good guy and he has political ambitions. That sticking around the Bolsonaro government is a really bad idea. So, he went on TV and spoke frankly about what he thought, knowing that he might get fired. And I think Bolsonaro and Trump have the same exact, what we would call adverse selection problem, which is they got terrible people working when they came into office. Even people got disgusted and quit, the Mathises of the world or whoever. So now it's more the bottom barrel. So someone like William Barr, these people under normal circumstances simply wouldn't be qualified, right? These are these thuggy, disgusting people with no good idea, often enriching themselves. And if they go, who's left? Only someone even worse. So I think this is, a real problem for Bolsonaro and for us. My comments on articles that you mentioned in the paper.
Thank you. And this is Teach Your Children About Racism and Protest. That's exactly what we did last night on our show. We had Amber and her 3 daughters who have a podcast where they talked about race, and we talked about race and how to talk to your children about race and protest. It was fascinating. Everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can go back and see all of these conversations, including last week's conversation with Anya's husband, Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate, and also see these conversations we've been having about the multiple pandemics we're going through right now. This is the at-home section that they have created now to help people get through the crisis, what things to do with your kids, things to read, podcasts, things like that. And then I've been using the 5 dishes to cook this week to cook 1 dinner a week, because my family is filled with terrific cooks. The twin 17-year-olds cook and Rupa cooks. So I've been assigned one meal a week, the one dinner that I'm to do. And I want to just give a shout out to my family for allowing me the time to do all of these shows and communicate and write and all of that. And so they're very generous with letting me do one dinner a week. And so I have to decide, because after this I'm going shopping. I've been cooking from this recipe list. And so I have to decide. So Anya, we'll think of you. You can tell me, should I cook the roasted squash with turmeric ginger peas, or the creamy turmeric pasta, or the stovetop chicken thighs, or the sheet pan roasted fish, or the toasted coconut rice with bok choy and fried eggs?
Gosh, so I thought that the roasted squash sound good. I do sheet pan fish several times a week. And by the way, I'm really glad you raised this, because in fact, I might do fish with peppers tonight. I'm really glad you raised this, because this is a common thing about the pandemic. When it started, I was cooking for I was cooking 9 meals a day, because I cook for a 92-year-old friend who lives nearby, plus my doorman, plus my neighbor who's an emergency room doctor, plus 2 stranded students, plus my husband. And I definitely found that women carry such a burden, because one of the things that happens to me is everybody who wants to reach my husband and can't get hold of him emails me. So all day long, people are asking me, like, could you film your husband and then, send us the video, and you tape him for us, and can you know when he's free? So I think it's really interesting that you've got enough bodies in your house to all share some of the chores. And I definitely brought my labor on myself, because nobody asked me to start cooking for the doorman or my neighbor, the doctor, but I knew it was a need I could meet. But I love those recipes. And, again, I know some people think it's superficial to talk about recipes, but in the beginning of the pandemic, I was feeding so many people, and it was scary not knowing I could go to the supermarket and wondering how I could get food. What I loved about those recipes was they took the view, I can't remember if it was Melissa Clark, all the recipes changed. Like, if you have garlic, great. If you don't have an onion, if you don't have an onion, put a shallot. If you don't have a shallot, put a scallion. And those recipes were written in a way that, comforted and consoled and made cooking not a source of anxiety.
Absolutely. And by the way, kudos to you cooking for 9 people. That's incredible. And you are, I always knew you were a generous person, but cooking for your doorman and your neighbors, how many of us were able to do that? And I think that's really important. Here we're looking at the op-ed section of the Times, and I'm finally an angry Black man. I suppressed my rage about racism for decades. No more. It started with our president, says Isaac Bailey. Black voters are coming for Trump. The problem of police riots. They're an attack on civil society and democratic accountability. Is this the end of college as we know it? And I pushed past the articles in the New York Times Magazine about college and what is going to happen. So these are big issues. The only way to save higher education is to make it free. We know, obviously, that universities like Columbia and others, they have made undergraduate college affordable. If you can get into Columbia and you're from a poor family, you can go basically for free at most of the Ivies. But graduate school, of course, is still expensive. And then says rich colleges can spend more. Paul Campos is a professor at the University of Colorado Law School. And the farmers of Instagram, and death and taxes. And then here is the editorial page of the New York Times, How to Reopen America's Schools, The Bonfire of Trump's Vanity by Maureen Dowd. Nick Kristof, what if there were no George Floyd video? Very important question. And Ross Douthat, why the coronavirus is winning. A virus doesn't care about ideological preconceptions. And so much to unpack in all of this. We just don't have the time. But here's Life Without Baseball is one of the stories. And then I just wanted to show you, Anya, because you may have seen this before, but I've never seen this.
The Angry Black Man is amazing.
Sorry. Yeah,
the Angry Black, Why I'm an Angry Black Man op-ed was amazing. If you're only going to read one, that might be the one that I would read. actually.
Oh, great suggestion. Thank you. I love that. And then I don't think I've ever seen this in all the years I read the New York Times. As you know, this is the editorial section, meaning the publisher's point of view. And then here's the op-ed, or opposite the editorial, as they call it. And so here it's usually an unsigned editorial, sometimes signed, but very rarely in a lead position. Sometimes the unsigned ones are here. But look at this. Bret Stephens, Donald Trump is our national catastrophe, is the only op-ed, only opinion from the editorial desk. So someone who understands this can explain, or we'll get an editor to come on and talk to us what the meaning of this is. As you know, Bret Stephens was the focus of so much controversy not because of his opinions, but the fact that the Times was promoting someone who's been wrong on so many things and giving them space. And so here, have you seen this before, a signed op-ed above the fold like this?
No. And you raise a really important point, Sree, which is that the New York Times has been doing all kinds of things to signal to us the gravity of the situation. I'm sure you talked last week about the front page with all of the deaths, right? In that old school small print. So they're using visuals right now to let all of us know that things are different and make different points than they normally would. I think I saw a day where they had part of the page blank even, right? So they're
right. That's right. They did that. Look at some of the people we lost. And they are tracking this because obviously 100,000 plus people have died in the United States, and we worry how many more will die. We're just looking at the Wall Street Journal from yesterday. As the president was asked yesterday, he was asked, what are you doing about systemic racism? He said, the economy and all the great news from the economy will fix the problem. Look what happened. Even as the numbers came out yesterday, uptick in Black unemployment, and besides which there was some mischaracterization of some numbers, and therefore the numbers were made to look better than they really were. And Trump already took his his victory lap yesterday over that. So now let me just turn my camera around and say hello and goodbye to Anya after she gets us a chance to share some of her final thoughts with us.
Oh, thank you. No, it's just I'm looking at all the comments and seeing so many people I know saying so many nice things. I think this is wonderful. And just I think my final thought would be how terrifying the situation is for journalists right now. Tibinyani in Botswana has written an article saying that at the end of this, nearly all the African newspapers will probably be finished. Luminary Foundation has called what's going on an extinction for media. We're seeing this total collapse of advertising revenue around the world for media, even as demand is soaring. I want to subscribe. I also just want to flag, both covered in the Times, but not today, that France and Australia are now using copyright law, it's a competition law, to force Google to pay royalties when they use news. And I think we're going to have to start really regulating the tech companies and taxing them big time so that we can save journalism. The New York Times will weather this crisis, but there's a lot of outlets in many parts of the world that will not. And so I think we have to think bold about policy measures. So that would really be what I'm interested in for next. And Sree, this is wonderful. And it's so nice to see so many friends and make new friends in the comments. So really appreciate the opportunity. I'll stick around. Watch the doctor. I'm always interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, I just wanted to say that I hope you'll have time later to go into the comments in Facebook, because I know it's hard to read and talk at the same time, and I'm sure there are questions we didn't get to. Also, as you know, I taught at Columbia Journalism School for 20 years, and Columbia is known for its journalism program, but SIPA, the School of International Affairs, has a terrific media concentration that you run. I got to teach in it long before you were there, and so many powerful and successful media figures have come out of that concentration, and under your direction it's doing great work, so I want to salute you on that. And give us how people can learn about the program, and name some of the people who've been through that, including my classmate Sudarshan Raghavan, who was the Washington Post foreign correspondent, is just an example of dozens and dozens of very famous journalists who came out of the program.
That's right. Well, you were when you were at Columbia, and even now, you've been an enormous help to us for years, helping me hire adjuncts, helping me suggest what direction to go in. So many times I came to see you at the journalism school for advice, and you were always, I'll never forget how generous you were. Yeah, we've got so many unbelievable superstars out of our program. One of the students I was really close to is actually and became a journalist, and she says I'm the one who told her got her really to think about Twitter, which I find hard to believe, but is Karen Attia, who's an editor, a global editor at the Washington Post op-ed, and she was Jamal Khashoggi's editor, and she is now a world force for freedom of expression. So she's one of our successful grads. Pamela Druckerman, who writes those wonderful columns about domestic life and that wonderful book, Bringing Up Bebe and Life at 40. She's one of our alumni. We've got students, Nicole Foster is now head of web content at UNICEF. We've got a whole passel. I actually went down to the New York Times last year because I had about 4 students at the New York Times and they hadn't met each other. So I just went and sat in that coffee shop there and got them all together to say hello to each other. And then we have a lot of students, working in government too. Sometimes I remember one time to visit the president of the African division, the chief economist, I think Tunis, and it turned out his assistant was a SIPA grad. So they pop up everywhere. The Central Bank of Mongolia, all over our SIPA grads. And some of them, my specialization and go into journalism, and a lot of them end up doing more communications or policy work. Or now a lot of them are obviously getting jobs, in digital and doing digital. But anyway, we have lots of info about the programs. If anybody wants to apply or just is curious, email me at acf76@columbia.edu, and I'll send you a list of the classes and adjuncts. Savita is one of our newer adjuncts who's been doing a great job on digital technology and development. So it's been great, but it's been great partly because of you, Sree.
Oh, thank you. And I want everyone to subscribe to Anya's newsletter. If you joined us later in the conversation, she has a weekly newsletter. It's now up to 14 issues. Check that out by writing to her at ACS76 and at columbia.edu. But do not write to her asking her to do camera work with her husband because he is fully booked. She's fully booked. And this is the kind of short-sightedness that people aren't thinking that you would be busy not just in your work but also everything else you're doing and asking you for favors. So do not write to her for that. Write to her only asking about SIPA or asking about getting on the newsletter, please, for her.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching the segment with Anya. We are going to bring on our doctor in just a moment. But Anya, thank you very much. We're saying goodbye. All right, that was an amazing conversation with Anya Schiffrin, journalist, professor, and just a great newsletter writer now on top of everything else. She's going to become Dr. Anya Schiffrin on July 17th or so, and we're very excited to celebrate that when that moment happens. We're going to be joined by Holly Lofton, MD, a doctor at NYU Langone in just a bit. But in the meantime, here is Neil.
Hey, Sree, what a great show. There are 2 things I'd like to talk about before we bring on Dr. Lofton. The first is a special promotion that we're doing for Father's Day. So folks remember for Mother's Day, we did a promotion where folks had an opportunity to recognize their moms and the mother figures in their lives. And we had half the money went to charity. In that case, it was Nick Kristoff's C19 Impact Initiative, right? So we're so glad that we were able to do that. For Father's Day, June 21st, we're going to do a similar effort. So for both the morning show, the New York Times read along at 8:30 a.m. and the Sree COVID-19 call at 9 p.m. Again, 50% of the proceeds will go to charity. Thank a father figure or grandfather, uncle, male role model on Father's Day. But we're trying to simplify it this time. So we're going to have people just one option, submit a picture and a message. For $75, we'll read that message on the air. The link is digimentors.link/Father's Day. You'll see a picture of Sree and his father, and then me and my father. I went back to the archives to find that picture of me and my dad. But I want to show people what the promos look like, just to give them a sense of what we'll be doing. It's really, I think it's really important to show kind of these examples, and I'm just going to bring them up real quickly. So give me one moment. Sorry about that. First, what we'll do is to show the form that we'll be using to share. So here's the form. You'll be able to sign up online and just send in your information, upload, tell us who this recognition is from.
Neil, we need to see the form.
I'm sorry, Sree?
No, we need to see you were mentioning the form. Are you showing it?
Oh, I apologize. Sorry. Here's the form itself. And I can make that just a little bit bigger. This is what the form looks like. It's really simple. We just fill in your information, upload a photo, give us your information. And an important note, just indicate that you know that the money is going to, half money is going to charity. And then let us know whether you're going to send the money via PayPal or Venmo after you before you submit the form. Then submit the form, and we will be on our way. So we're going to do this in 2 weeks, June 21st. So I think that's going to be very exciting, and we'll see a number of people participate, hopefully.
We had greetings sent to 25 moms last time, moms, aunts, grandmothers, etc. We hope to see even more this time on this show, and we have a blockbuster guest that's going to be joining us. So apt because of what we're doing. So it's Father's Day. We're going to have a father as a guest, and the father is Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times. Last year at this time, Neil and I went to Tom's home and interviewed him and talked to him about the New York Times. So it's a year since, and he's coming back on Father's Day on June 21st. Everybody will want to see that show to hear what it's like to be the print editor of the New York Times at this moment. So please tune in for that. And if you have a father figure in your life who you'd like to honor, maybe the kids want to honor their dad, maybe you want to honor somebody in your life. It doesn't have to be your father. It could be a father figure. We'd love to make this happen. So please join us. And we will be having 2 shows that day, the regular 8:30 a.m. New York Times Read Along and the regular COVID-19 related show at 9 p.m. Eastern. And of course, tonight we'll have a 9 p.m. Eastern show as well. And I think Neil has a promo card to tell you a little bit about that show, because this family here knows the New York Times Read Along. I'll just show you before we go to that. These are examples of how we did the Mother's Day. So we would read a message from the family and show any picture you like of the mom. And now we'll do it for your dad. So for example, that's me as a kid in Tokyo with my mom. Here is Pam and Emily. That's Neil's wife and daughter. And we would just read the message out loud and talk about these wonderful women. We'll do that now for the dads in your life or father figures in your life. And that's how we did that. So that will run twice. And we think it's a very nice Father's Day gift. The mothers who got this as a gift were thrilled. And you can always take a screenshot and send it to your mom. You can do a video screenshot as well if you would like. So we hope you will participate in that. And I just want to show you a little bit about the regular show we do every day. We do a show with my producers, Vandana Menon and Rose Horowitz. And we're now up to show 87, but in the first 75 shows, we had more than 1 million viewers, and we had 155 guests from 38 cities in 10 countries, and 91 of the 155 guests were women, and that was very deliberate. The show is produced in conjunction with Scroll.in, one of India's leading news and culture websites. They have millions of followers on their socials, and they run it parallel with us in simulcasting it. So that's how we get that huge audience. And we've had more than 25 doctors on the show. And speaking of doctors, we're going to bring ours on. But before that, we're just going to do a shout out to our sponsors one more time.
Absolutely. And I just want to show some of the comments that we had. Paula specifically was mentioning that her family surprised her with that thank you from Mother's Day. So Paula, please give our best to Tenley. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see some good participation in our upcoming event. So before we do the sponsors, Sree, you did mention our next guest. Next week's guest is going to be Jack Myers, who is an outspoken advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equality in the workplace. So he'll be joining us next week, June 14th at 8:30, from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. So for now, what we want to do is start, again, thank our sponsors, and we'll start with Muck Rack.
We're doing a free certification course that starts in 2 weeks, Fundamentals of Social Media for journalists, public relations pros, and everyone. You don't have to be a journalist to participate. Anybody of any age can sign up today, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. More than 3,500 people have already signed up. I've learned so much putting this course together with my dear colleague, Linda Bernstein. So everybody, please take a photo of this or a screenshot and send it to a friend. Tag a friend right now, mrac.co/social, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for that show, a free certification that everybody will get. Thank you, Neil.
And our next sponsor we want to recognize is Magic Bus. Magic Bus imagines a world where children break out of poverty and lead fulfilling, rewarding lives, contributing to their community and to the world around them. As you can see, 7 out of 10 adolescents in India do not have a higher secondary qualification. 6 out of 10 youth do not have the soft skills necessary for employment. And 3 out of 10 girls are married before they reach the age of 18. So thank you again to Magic Bus for your support of the New York Times Read Along. In addition to Muck Rack and Magic Bus, we also would like to thank Strategy Focus Group. Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. We'd like to thank Greg Gallant, Mike Schneider, Pradnya Haldapur, and Ron Thomas for their support of the New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Sree Srinivasan, Sree@Sree.net, and myself, Neil Parekh, neil@neilparekh.org. We'd also like to encourage you to learn more about our sponsors by following the links to their websites. They have some great information, some great opportunities for you. So you can learn more at readalong.link/muckrack, readalong.link/magicbususa, or readalong.link/strategy-focused-group. So please support our sponsors, learn more about the work that they're doing. And again, thank you for all of your support.
Okay, we're ready for our doctor. She's been very patient in waiting for us. So let's get started. Our doctor is Holly Lofton, MD from NYU Langone Health. We're very grateful to her for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. Happy to hear all the information. The first guest was amazing. So I'm really happy to try to follow up on her heels. Thanks so much for having me, Sree.
Thank you for being here. And I know you're good friends with several of my doctor friends, including Marina Kurian and Holly Chandrasekhar. Sujana Chandrasekhar. You're Holly Lofton. I'm
Yes.
getting all the doctors confused. But I should have also said that the two of them are going to be guests on my show on the Sunday Read Along next week. So it's going to be fun to hear from them. But today you're here. Our first question to all our guests is, how are you? How's your family? Where are you?
Thank you so much. So I am in North Bergen, New Jersey, which is not too far from Lincoln Tunnel. And we're doing fine. Thank you so much for asking. You know, the homeschooling and working from home and now working back in the office has been a challenge, but it's a welcome challenge because we get to spend more time with the family and really see the roots of what we do everything for. So I'm happy to be able to do a lot of things virtually. I feel this will change how we go forward with our lives. And the idea of doing more virtual visits to doctors, virtual meetings will allow us to spend more time with family and get to know each other better.
And how have you adjusted to all of that? Because I know despite being a doctor and a very busy, influential, powerful woman, at the end of the day, a lot of the burden falls on the women in the house.
Absolutely. Well, there's those conversations you have to have with the significant other, my husband, about, I need you to take on these roles when I can't do as much. It's a lot. And shout out seriously to all the teachers. My mom's a teacher. She taught English. My dad is a principal. So I know how much education matters and how much work goes into it. So now doing all this homeschooling, I hear so much from my friends about the homeschooling and how they have to take on this burden. But we have to remember that these people do it on a daily basis without complaint and with little pay and are happy to do it. So let's take a time to enjoy the time we can spend with our children, teaching them, because we're really the roots of what our children can produce and become in the long run.
Thank you, Doc. I should point out that Shonda Rhimes, the great Shonda Rhimes, posted on the very early part of this pandemic. She says, I've been homeschooling my kids for 1 hour. And I am so, she was so overwhelmed that she said, teachers should get $1 billion a year in salary.
Yes.
Or a week, she said, or $1 billion a week. And that just shows you the importance of teachers. And as you said, and so shout out to your family. Obviously, you have teachers who have inspired you right in your family, and that is awesome. Let's talk about your work, please. Tell us the kind of medicine you practice. Tell us where you practice, and also we want to make sure everybody can find you on social. So you're on Twitter and you're on Instagram too.
Yeah. So my office is on the east side of Manhattan, very close to the East River. I'm very blessed that I get to practice obesity medicine, which is a field of medicine that's dedicated to weight management. So that really means I focus on people who mostly need to lose weight and keep it off. I do also see patients who need to gain weight. That's a smaller percentage of my practice, but I work in the same physical suite as the surgeons who practice bariatric surgery, and I do what we call bariatric medicine. So patients are there to lose weight, keep it off. What we do is focus on lifestyle intervention. That's diet, exercise, behavioral change to help with weight loss, as well as using FDA-approved pharmaceuticals to help with weight loss. So there are many options for weight management that are available, and we really work to bring the science to the community to help us get adequate weight loss. I want to bring up a point because I've heard so many interesting, I'll say it that way, stories about things people have been practicing during pandemic and before to lose weight. You really want to vet your sources of information. And Sree, you're doing a wonderful job of using the paper, your knowledge, and your guests about giving real information to the community. Because I've heard things like weight loss patches, you put this on your foot and you'll lose weight. You really want to make sure that the information you're getting is, one, safe, two, going to be effective and for you. So we really do vet that for our patients. And we do this in a environment that is comforting and welcoming. We're not there to shame anyone, and we understand about the politics of weight bias. So that's what I do. I practice weight management. NYU Langone Health. It's First Avenue between 30th and 34th.
And you're on Twitter as Dr. H. Lofton and on Instagram as skinnydoc_MD. I also wanted to ask you to reflect, if you could, for a moment about the protests and everything that's happening, because you obviously will have a view on it that may be different from me, and everybody has a specific view on what's happening.
Absolutely. We went back to our offices to see patients in person about 3 weeks ago. And during this time, I told you I live in New Jersey. I would commute to the city, and then I need to get to the east side. So this week especially, or last week, I started to see more of the evidence without seeing the actual protest in person. So the first day I actually went in and I tried to pick up a city bike to get some exercise to get to work. I was running late and I saw a store that I've known to be there for many years, a men's clothing store that was smashed in, and there obviously had been looted and there was no one there protecting it. I took my ride and I saw several retail stores with their areas graffitied and windows broken, and I want to point out that there are differences in those who are caring and active and still disgusted and annoyed by the violence that is taken in this area. And I say this area, including this entire country, but also New York, Minneapolis, across the world, against people of color. This also happens in things like Central Park, where we don't really have any reason for it to occur. So when we have peaceful protest, and I want to point out the point that it's peaceful, people can really enjoy and communicate the issue, and we don't want to facilitate further violence by having the police and the authorities who are there to do their jobs again fight back in a way that's causing more violence. So I do see this. I know I went home that same day and I saw a peaceful protest all along 34th Street. People of different races, ages, of course, women, men, different genders coming out to state their cause. This with signs, with chants. And I thought this was wonderful. Some of the NYU employees came out of the Cancer Center to support these peaceful protests. So I think it's a wonderful thing. We have to then again balance that with our social distancing, however, because this can create some challenges if we're not safe.
It can. Can you talk a little bit about your own experience as a Black woman in America, a doctor? Are there times when people have misjudged you, mischaracterized you, misunderstood who you are and what you do?
Oh, of course. I'll tell you that many times when I'll be in the office. Now in the age of social media and the website, it doesn't happen as much because people tend to vet their doctors and look online at the website or look for reviews before they come in. But there have been many times when I've seen a patient and I'll say, okay, we're done here. And they'll say, is the doctor coming in next? I'll say, I am the doctor and we're done. So there's just some miscommunication a lot of the times. Thankfully, I haven't dealt with any, what I foresee as blatant racism in the patient office or office visit. And I think that comes from working in a community such as NYU, which is very supportive as far as equality with hiring and with and dealing with issues such as patient relations. But there are again challenges. I have to deal with, for example, some people not understanding that as a physician and being a young Black woman, that I still have this information and knowledge that I want to share with you, and it's not me coming to the patient with information I've read off the internet or something like that. So I do think that we need to really work on still creating equality and understanding that we do have bias. That's one thing I do is teach medical students, and I teach residents, and I teach fellows about bias with regards to weight specifically, but this also exists with regards to race, gender, as far as people's ethnicity. So one thing that definitely exists is bias with regards to weight. And this is something that we have to understand that we may hold within us, even if it's not explicit. So explicit weight bias means I see a person, they're heavier than me, and I'm not going to let them do what they want to do, get in the line in the grocery store before me because I don't like their weight. And then there's the implicit bias. And this exists even within the healthcare system, even within those who are practicing weight management. An example of implicit bias would be, I'm seeing this patient and they're heavier than I would like them to be, or their BMI or body mass index or height weight ratio is higher than it should be. And I have a thought that this person is lazy, that this person is not going to follow my recommendations, that they're going to be non-compliant, and that they have no self-care or regard for their own health care. And this is something that we have to, one, realize that exists within our healthcare practices, and two, put it behind you. It may not be possible to let go of implicit bias, but we have to put it behind ourselves in order to practice equality in healthcare.
Thank you for pointing that out, because those are very important issues that we want to try and understand. We have lots of comments and questions coming on here on LinkedIn. Benno Mueller says, thank you, and right on, Holly, he says. And that's absolutely right, Holly, says Benno. Deborah says, links to obesity to COVID severity, also blood type impact. So that's one of the things we hear, is that their obesity can affect how you respond or how COVID affects you.
Absolutely. So we know that patients with obesity, and I also want to include patients with overweight, that is a medical condition. Obesity is defined as having a body mass index, height weight ratio. And if any of our viewers want to check out your body mass index, there are plenty of online calculators which can tell you what your BMI is. But BMI over 30 kilograms per meter squared is defined as obesity. If we have between 25 and 30, that is overweight. And I want to point out, this is a condition that I also treat. I treat normal weight for maintenance, I treat overweight to lose weight, and I treat obesity to lose weight. So patients with obesity have an issue with adiposity. So that means carrying excessive fat tissue. So we understand that fat tissue is an active endocrine organ. And that means that it doesn't just sit there as a dormant state, it secretes cytokines, which are hormones that have some inflammatory duties. And one of those inflammatory duties is secrete IL-6, which is a very inflammatory cytokine, which can make diseases worse. So if you have an infection such as COVID and you develop pneumonia, that IL-6 coming from the fatty tissues, every single fat cell is secreting IL-6. That alone makes the infection worse. So that's the first negative with obesity and overweight with COVID. The second is restrictive lung disease. So when we have adiposity or fat tissue that is around the midsection, for example, that can actually push up on the lungs. So the lungs can't actually expand as well as they would like to. So you can't take good oxygenation or even breathe out as well as you would like. This leads to decreases in airway, increases in airway resistance, and decreases in lung volume. So patients with obesity already at baseline have difficulty breathing because they simply can't expand the lungs enough. Now you add on to this a severe infection like COVID, which is actually two viruses, and there's just no chance. You have the increased inflammation, you have the decrease in your lung volumes, the increase in airway resistance, and patients are much more likely to experience severe illness, require mechanical ventilation, and 2 to 3 times as likely to pass away or have death from this condition.
Thank you for sharing that. Lots of great information coming in with Dr. Holly Lofton. Please follow her on Twitter and Instagram. I wanted to ask you a question about weight management, and there's so many different fads or ways in which, just in my lifetime, I've noticed focus on everything from the Atkins diet, right, low carb, to different kinds of things. I myself am doing intermittent fasting, and it has worked for me, though I call it a fad. I've been doing it since August of last year till now and lost 20 pounds. but I still feel it's a fad, because if it works, for the audience, intermittent fasting is where you eat in a specific 8 or 6 hour window. And if it really worked, this is what I say, if it works, why doesn't everybody know about it? And we've seen these ideas come and go. So what advice do you give people?
Well, one thing is you want to make sure that the plan that you're doing works for your lifestyle. And one thing with intermittent fasting, it's a physiologic state that our bodies are designed to endure. A lot of what happens right now with weight gain and obesity in America and across the world really is that we have a lot of access to food. It's simple. Now how we gain weight is actually very complex. It's not only about calories in, calories out. It's about how our hormones respond to eating certain foods, to the timing of certain foods, and then we have to think about the adulterants that are in foods that we eat now. But our bodies are really designed to live in states such as jungles, deserts, where we may have times where we have a famine. So when we don't have food, our bodies will look to our other stores of energy. So the first energy source will be the sugar that we store in the liver called glycogen. And the body uses that. Actually, every night, the body uses glycogen to survive. That's why we don't die at night. Now, if you run out of glycogen, and this is something very common with a ketogenic diet, you run out of glycogen after about 3 to 5 days of not having any carbohydrates, the body starts to use its fat as an energy store. And this is a very natural resource to use to obtain energy. So when we think about these fads and diets, the things do work. We just have to make sure that it's adaptable to one's lifestyle. So intermittent fasting, to bring it back to your question, Sree, it creates a time when you eat. Let's say you eat from noon to 8 p.m. and then you don't eat from 8 p.m. to noon the next day. Your body is forced to find some other source of energy. So it will use your glycogen in your liver. It will use some of your fat stores. And that's a natural state. Our bodies were designed to survive in this time. Just as we would be in the jungle and not have a giraffe to find and eat, we would survive with intermittent fasting. So when you're looking at a nutritional state to take on as a lifestyle, it's important that you think about it as either a lifestyle, I'm going to do this forever, or as a weight loss method, and then I'll transition into a weight maintenance effort. But weight is a condition that needs to be treated for life. There's not a diet that you can take on for 6 weeks, 3 months, and then resume the usual eating pattern, which makes it of high calorie density foods, and then expect the weight not to come back on. The body, it really is designed to want to increase weight to help survive famines. So we really have to work to lose weight and keep it off and make sure that the actions that we use are reasonable for the person who's doing them. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see some more of the questions and comments that have been coming in. Julia Weeks, who is our medical producer and put together the segment and helped facilitate your being here. Again, thank you for being here. She asked a question about, do you expect a second wave and because of the protests and people not practicing social distancing, or will it be hard to tell because everybody's opening up at the same time? I know part of the answer to that no matter what happens, the protesters will get blamed, even if the reason is because everyone's at the hair salon.
Correct. You're right. They're doing a lot of patient tracking, and even my research coordinator in my office is getting the training to do patient tracking to find out what the source of COVID and other diseases will be. But the thing is, we have to figure out what is going to happen next. And that really depends on the metrics. We see the governor coming on television and we see all the articles about what will happen. And these metrics, hospital admissions, ICU admissions, these will tell us what steps we can take next. And we have to look at these carefully in addition to testing. I can't amplify enough the effect of more widespread testing. The fact that it's available to more people that are asymptomatic and can easily do a drive-through testing or go to their local doctor's office or laboratory to get these testings is really important. But to answer Julia's question about the protests, we're having large group gatherings. with people of uncertain status for long periods of time. And it is a concern because we don't know what the outcomes of this will be. We will find out, and we have to keep looking at these metrics as far as what's happening in the hospital and the results of our testing. People can be retested. I want to point that out to your viewers, that if you feel you've had an exposure to someone with COVID, or you've been in one of these large gatherings, feel free to go and get tested again with the PCR test. This is the nasal swab, because your status can change, and we need to know this information so that we can, one, make decisions for your individual healthcare, but two, decide what to do with the community.
Thank you. Let's look at it. We only have a couple more minutes with you. Let's get some of the questions that have been coming in. And Carla says, how important is the way obesity is treated in children to the lifelong outcomes of managing weight?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying that I am a child with obesity, and I consider my obesity to be in remission, meaning I'm always treating it with something, lifestyle, diet, exercise, behaviors. So this is integral. It's so important to, one, recognize obesity in children, because there are some genetic components. I tell my patients that the 3 orbs that determine one's weight are genetics, environment, and physiology, or how your body works. And right now we don't have any genetic treatments for these issues. So there is some genetic obesity, and we're starting to unravel some of this information with it. But there are children who are going to be obese just because of their genes, and you can change their environment, but you really need to focus on this as a condition. Just as if a kid has asthma, you send them to the doctor for that. There are pediatric obesity specialists who can help children, because lifelong outcomes, as your question is, Carla, is very important. We see children with type 2 diabetes. We see people turning from 18 to 19 with type 2 diabetes. So we need to try to, one, identify, and two, manage these things with behavioral therapies, with FDA-approved treatments that we can use for our children, because this is a very serious condition, and it can decrease longevity, meaning lower the children's lifespan. And this is a growing concern across the world.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see if we can get some more of the comments on the screen. And also, if you have anything that you'd like to add at this moment, we're showing your website there. Look at that. That's that's the NYU website, and also some more information about you that's being shared on the screen right there. So that's great. So everybody can find Dr. Lofton by going to her Twitter handle, which is at Dr. H. Lofton, and her Instagram, skinnydoc_MD. And just, you talked a little bit about your own struggles. Can you elaborate on how you knew that you needed to work on this?
Absolutely. I'm very forthcoming with this, because I think patients do come to me more because I empathize with them, in addition to just understanding the science behind it. So I remember going to my doctor's appointment with my mom, I was a pediatrician, and them showing her the weight curve, and then it was way off the charts. And so I really give credit to my mother, who is a wonderful woman, and she started taking me to go skating more. I was always active. I did cheerleading and different sports for as long as I can remember, but it really was about the dietary change. Because we can be active, and our kids need to do more activity. Unfortunately, we're stuck in this pandemic where we don't have access to even parks right now. It's such a shame. And then working from home more as global incident, it can make it so much harder to get the activity that we need. So we really have to focus on our dietary thing. So I actually went to Weight Watchers together with my mother when I was about 11. And then I was able to understand some of the nutritional changes to make versus what we were doing. We were going to drive-thrus all the time, eating a lot of fried food. And when I was able to take on more of the options, we were able to get really significant weight loss. I lost the weight actually within a summer. I went back to school, and the kids didn't recognize me. I tried out for cheerleading, and we got our uniforms ordered in the fall, and at the end of the spring, I should say. And then when we came back in the fall, mine completely didn't fit. So it was that dramatic of a weight loss. And it really just changing diet and being cognizant about it. So even little things like extra snacks and chips, fried food, sugary beverages. I can't emphasize enough the impact of sugary beverages. This is any type of juice, no matter how natural it is, no matter how expensive it is. Our kids should not be drinking this because it really causes such significant weight gain. And the type of fat that it produces is very hard to lose. So these are things that I've experienced, and I would share with your viewers out there to really focus on the childhood obesity, because it is also an epidemic, and treating this is going to help these children as they become adults.
And we, of course, know that in the African-American community and immigrant communities and communities of color, or where there's poverty, there are food deserts. And so there's, in fact, in India, we always observe that poor Americans can be overweight, whereas poor people in countries like India are emaciated and have other problems. But this kind of obesity seems to be an American problem resulting from the American diet for poor people.
Absolutely. One thing I always ask my patients is, when did you first start to notice a weight problem? And for those who immigrated, it's all the time when I moved to America. So we have to look at our diet and the access to food and see really what is present. And I personally believe that some of the adulterants that we have, or I should say preservatives, other things that we add to our food in America, make it more likely to cause weight gain. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here. It says, in your practice, how do you deal with some of our bad habits in the way we prepare our food, which can cause gain weight? Many of us like our fried foods and other things that aren't good for us. And Mark is a dear friend of the show, and he was my guest on our show talking about race relations in America and some of those issues. So he's talking about our community. He means in part the African-American community and Indian community. I think we also eat a lot of fried foods and things like that. So can you talk about that, please?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I would say is I definitely don't want to deny anyone their ethnic foods that are their favorites. It's just about the frequency of it. So I really recommend that patients have one day a week where you have those favorites. My patients say, but I'm Dominican, for example. I say, well, be Dominican on Saturday, so you can have your food that you enjoy on one day a week if you know they're bad for you. But you can also look to make changes in your diet and the recipes, the way you make them. Maybe make them with less oil, or don't fry it all the time. But feel free to have those favorites maybe once a week, and the things that are very much more rich, at holidays and on birthday parties, so that you don't have to lose your ethnic comfort foods, but that you can still live a healthy lifestyle. And the other thing I want to point out is be active. You have to really burn off calories, but really changing what you eat is going to make a big difference. And if you're having issues, because it's wonderful for me to come on here and say, eat less, move more. It's not that simple. If you're having issues, please reach out to me or any other provider who specializes in weight management, dietitian, even if you do something online, because this is a condition. It's a medical problem. And there are certain people who can change their lifestyle and decrease their food, increase their activity, who will not lose weight. And those are the patients that we want to get in, do a full assessment, and really get you adequate results and prevent long-term disease.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. We are running out of time. We want you to give us some of your kind of final thoughts for now. We hope you'll come back and share your thoughts. I know you've helped so many people already, but if someone's just tuning in and they say, okay, doctor, what are 3 things I can work on with my lifestyle, my work, my food, etc.? What are the 3 things you would want people to focus on?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you this, I've been seeing patients virtually and in person during this COVID pandemic, and there are really 2 avenues. The patients who are losing weight, one, are keeping in touch with me as their provider, and then the patients who are gaining weight, I see a very typical pattern of increasing processed carbohydrates. So if you are gaining weight during this time, activity may not be the best way to do it right now, because our gyms are closed, our parks are closed, and things like that. So watch your intake of processed carbohydrates. This is pasta, bread, these types of things, and then try to be more active. Also, Sree, I totally agree with your idea of intermittent fasting. This can work wonders. This can be a lifestyle change. So if you want to really give yourself a cutoff time for eating, if you want to make that 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, think what works for you and have a start time for eating. You do not have to have 3 meals a day because mom said so. Okay, this is information that was given us maybe during the Depression, where we didn't have a lot of access to food. But now when we do, and we're having an obesity epidemic, in addition to a viral pandemic, we really need to focus on watching what we eat, the quality of foods that we eat, avoiding the processed foods. Please try to cook for yourselves. Please try to limit bread, rice, pasta intake. Focus on fresh fruits and vegetables. Beans are a high fiber carbohydrate you can have. And then if you're having trouble, please reach out to your provider. And of course, I'd be happy to see anyone who's out there.
Thank you. One question that I've always wondered is that you said, be careful about pasta, but pasta is in that famous Mediterranean diet where they eat and they seem not to put on any weight in France and in Italy and places like that. So can you explain that? Why is it about American? What's it about American pasta that's causing some of these issues? We also had, by the way, a comment from our friend Ron Thomas, who's a sponsor of this show. He's watching from Dubai, and his comment was that in Dubai, all the stores are filled with American cookies, other things. Here we go. American products, chips, cookies, big obesity problem for kids here in Dubai.
Yes, I absolutely see your comment, Ron. Well, I have seen the same trend where I have patients who go to Italy for vacation and eat pasta every day and come back losing weight. So I don't know what the adulterant is, I'll be honest. But there's something about the pasta that we have in our stores that causes people to gain weight. Whereas if you have more natural, I guess, or homemade pasta in other countries, that it's not the case. But to answer your question, the Mediterranean diet was designed as a study for heart disease. It was not a weight loss study. So patients in the Mediterranean diet study, which was called the Lionheart study, were given a French diet, which consists of, as you mentioned, pasta and have lots of grains and high fiber carbohydrates, and of course, as many fruits and vegetables and fish as you want. The difference is they were given basically butter, whereas the treatment arm was given something that's very similar to extra virgin olive oil. And what they were looking at was differences in heart disease. So that means, did they have a heart attack, a stroke, or did they die from heart disease? The change from the treatment group to the French diet was so massive. They saw a 73% reduction in heart disease and death that they had to stop the trial early. They found that it was so dangerous to even give the French diet people the diet any longer that they had to stop the study. Patients in this trial actually gained weight. They gained about 2 kilograms. They didn't see a difference in their cholesterol levels. There is nothing to explain the difference in the heart disease and the death other than the change in the type of oil or butter they were using. So this can be part of a healthy diet, but it does not lead to weight loss.
Got it. So I think we'll need to have you back to get into some more of these details but you are fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I know Sundays are very busy, busier than ever, and you're very kind to be with us today. Please follow the doctor on Twitter. She is Dr. H. Lofton on Twitter, and on Instagram, she's skinnydoc_MD. What's on tap today for you?
Today, so I'll probably take my kids out to my backyard pool, that's what we're doing now. And then I have a few emails to wrap up, little tasks to do, and get ready for the work week. Enjoy the outside weather.
Thank you. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we've ended a very long New York Times read along. If you just joined us part of the way, or if you've been here all the way, I'd love to hear for hours and 13 minutes. Way too long, but so much great information from Dr. Lofton and from Anya Schiffrin. Don't forget, next week, 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. We do this every we've been doing for 5 years. Jack Myers is an outspoken advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace, and we'll be here next Sunday. And then on Father's Day 1st, we're going to be meeting Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times, and we're going to do our Father's Day edition sponsorship opportunity. You can give a shout out to a father figure in your life, a father, grandfather, uncle, or a male role model on Father's Day. For $70, we'll show a picture of your dad and or this person, and we will show that on 2 shows, and we will read a message. And left you see a photo of me with my dad, and on the right you see a photo of our executive producer Neil Parekh with his dad Prakash, who I knew before I knew Neil's dad. And
yeah, that's one of the stories I like telling, that Sree and I actually met after I met his father, before meeting Sree, and our parents knew each other. So please join us for the special Father's Day edition. Again, we are going to be honoring father figures, grandfathers, uncles, whoever is important in your life.
all right, Neil.
With half of the money going to charity. So please make sure to join us. And again, next week's guest is going to be Tom Jolly. Not next week, June 21st. For Father's Day, our guest is going to be Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times. With that, I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care, and goodbye.